Today we are going to make the best beef jerky you've ever had, which is Alton Brown's recipe for homemade beef jerky made with flank steak. The great thing about making homemade jerky is you have total control over the ingredients, so you can use the highest quality meats and spices and you know exactly what went into it. There's no additional preservatives, sugars. Alton Brown's recipe is made from, as I mentioned, flank steak, which is very high quality protein, extremely lean. And the nice thing about working with extremely lean beef, other than hamburger or something else, is it has less of a tendency to get rancid. What causes problems with dehydrating meat is fat, and there's almost no fat on flank steak. It's extremely lean, so it preserves very, very well out on the trail, even if you're out for weeks. I've had some, I keep mine in the freezer, but I've had some that I've kept as long as a year, and it's still been wonderful after I popped it out of the freezer. So the ingredients that we're going to use today, the things you're going to need are some flank steak. I bought mine at Costco, which means that I have 2 flank steaks in here, so I'm going to have to double the recipe. A little soy sauce, you don't need quite this much, but some soy sauce, some Worcestershire sauce, just a touch of honey for a little bit of sweetness and crispness. And then for a little bit of heat, Alton Brown calls out red pepper flakes. I like to use cayenne pepper because with the pepper flakes, when you get one of the chunks of pepper seeds into your mouth, you get that little burst of heat. And if you like that, that's fine. But I actually prefer the smoothness and uniformity of a cayenne pepper. A couple drops of liquid smoke to give it that barbecue flavor. A little granulated onion. I like to use Penzi spices, but any granulated onion will do. And then, of course, a dehydrator. I'm using my American Harvest Snack Master that I've had for 30 years. And a Ziploc bag. I use a gallon Ziploc bag to hold this kind of quantity of meat. And this is for the marinade process. This will make it much easier to do the marinade in a Ziploc bag than any other container, because you don't really make that much marinade, so you want all of it to come in contact with the meat. So there's our ingredients. Let's go make some jerky. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the flank steak from the packaging, and we're going to put it on a stainless steel rack here, and we're going to pop it in the freezer. And the reason for that is it's much easier to slice it thin if it's just slightly frozen. You don't want it frozen all the way through, but you want it frozen far enough that it's easy to slice into very thin slices. So here we go. Our flank steak popped into the freezer. And while that is starting to freeze up a little bit and firm up, we'll go ahead and make our marinade. So because I bought my flank steak at Costco, I have 2 flank steaks instead of 1, so I have to double the recipe ingredients. Fortunately, this is made easier by the fact that my wife has these beautiful measuring cups that are for odd sizes. So Alton Brown's recipe calls for 2/3 of a cup, and I have a 2/3 of a cup measuring cup. So first up, our Lee & Perrins Worcestershire sauce, 2/3 of a cup once, 2/3 of a cup twice. I'm a little short there, no big deal. So one of the nice things about this recipe is the portions aren't super critical. If you're off by a few ounces here or there, no one's ever going to know. So we'll go just a little bit short on the soy sauce too, 2/3 of a cup and 2/3 of a cup. So there we've got our soy sauce. Now honey. It calls for 1 tablespoon of honey, so I need to double that up. There's 1, and there's 2. So there's our 2 tablespoons of honey. Now one of the ingredients I neglected to mention before is black pepper. Key ingredient in this recipe is black pepper. Without it, it just won't have that bite to it that black pepper brings. And I like to use freshly ground. The recipe calls for 2 teaspoons, but just do this to your heart's content. There we go, that looks pretty good, especially since my pepper mill just ran out of pepper. Now it calls for 2 teaspoons of onion powder, and once again we'll need to double that up, so we'll need roughly 4 teaspoons of onion powder. One of the nice things about making your own beef jerky is you can make the recipe your own. You can add or subtract ingredients pretty much, or modify the proportions a little bit to your taste so that it tastes the way you want it to taste. Okay, our cayenne pepper, that calls for 1 teaspoon of pepper flakes. I don't like too much heat, so about half the normal amount of pepper, so 1 teaspoon of cayenne in there. And then the liquid smoke calls for 1 teaspoon of that. So I like mine, I like that smoky flavor. So I'm going to do the full 2 teaspoons of liquid smoke. So there we go. We've got our Worcestershire sauce, our soy sauce, our honey, our black pepper, our onion powder, our liquid smoke. Give that a little bit of a stir just to make sure everything's combined. And we'll give it one more stir before we pour it into the bag to marinade. But now we need to wait a little while for that beef to harden up a little bit. Okay, about an hour has gone by and I've flipped the flank steak over a couple times just to make sure it's frozen on both sides, and I think we're ready to go. So let's grab one out of the freezer. Here we go, one nice flat flank steak. One of the reasons for putting it on the rack is it comes out nice and straight. You don't want to put it into the freezer all rolled up and then end up with a rolled up flank steak. You can see the grain of the meat on flank steak is very, very apparent. Runs the length. Alton Brown likes to cut it with the grain. This gives you nice long pieces that won't fall apart, but they're a little tough to chew. And I'm an old geezer, you know, my teeth aren't very good anymore. So I cut it across the grain, which is traditional for slicing flank steak because that gives you a nice leaner cut. So let's go ahead, start cutting this into about 1/8 inch or so slices. And it doesn't have to be real exact, although the dehydration will vary depending upon how thick or thin you have it cut. So here we go, slicing up our flank steak, and we'll come back when this is all done. I've grabbed my second flank steak out of the freezer, and just finishing up here, and you can see this, I've got about 4 pounds total of flank steak, and that's going to fill up this freezer bag pretty well. But you can see just how beautiful this beef is. There's a little bit of marbling in there, but not enough fat to really cause any issues. So there's our big bag o' beef. Let's give this one last stir here. There we go, that's good to go. Pour that into our bag. Now if you'll recall, I didn't fully double the recipe because I ran short of a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. But this is just a marinade. We're not cooking the marinade. It ends up just getting thrown away before everything is all said and done. But one of the nice things about using a freezer bag like this is you can mix this up good. The important thing is to make sure that all of the pieces of meat are coming into contact with the marinade, so they absorb flavor. And I'm going to go ahead and pop this into the refrigerator. The recipe calls for this to marinate for 3 to 6 hours, according to Alton Brown. I just let it go overnight. So it ends up going over 12 hours. And it's not a big deal. I like it to be more flavorful. I want to absorb as much of the marinade as possible. But as a result of that, I have to flip it over once or twice. So before I go to bed at night, I'll flip this over again just to make sure that all the pieces are getting coated with the marinade. So here we go, into the refrigerator, and I'll see you tomorrow morning when we'll pop it onto the dehydrator. Normally when I make jerky, I start a little bit later in the day, and I marinate this overnight. But today, I put the marinade on the beef at about 11 o'clock, and it's about 8:30 now. So this has been marinating over 9 hours already, and you can see the color has changed. It's gotten very dark. So rather than letting this go overnight, I'm going to go ahead and pop this out and drain it out, and then put this in the dehydrator and let it dehydrate overnight. And that way tomorrow morning I'll be all set to go. So it helps to have a colander or something to do this sort of thing, and some paper towels to wipe any excess marinade off. And normally I would just do this in the sink or something, but since I'm trying to stay on camera here, I'll do this in a bowl, hopefully without making too much of a mess. There we go. You can rinse this if you want to, but I don't like going to quite those extremes. I'll just use a paper towel here and periodically get some of the excess marinade off the beef. But here's what it looks like now. This is nice clean strips, and these just go really nicely on the trays. You don't need any kind of a liner or anything. You don't need to leave a lot of space in between these on the trays, but just enough so that there's a little bit of airflow through here, so they dry properly. But this is not a real exact science here. You just lay this out on your trays and off you go. Okay, I'm just finishing up here, and it looks like I will have just exactly 5 trays with my 4 pounds of beef. I'll have to fit a couple of these in here. Someday I have to maybe get a few more trays. But here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trays of beef, and we're ready to put this outside. I normally run my dehydrator outside here in Arizona. I don't have any issue with critters or anything in the backyard. That would be my big concern. When I lived in Minnesota, I used to put my dehydrator out in the garage where it was a little bit warmer than outdoors. But here in Arizona, between having in the walled-in backyard and having the dry air outside, it works out really well to have this outdoors. So we're all done loading up our trays here, and we're ready to put it outside and let it run overnight and dehydrate. Okay, I'm all set up outside here, and we've got our dehydrator set to about 140 degrees here. You want to cook meats at a little bit higher temperature, or dehydrate them at a little higher temperature. And it's about 8:30 at night, and I'll come out here and check it. It should be pretty much done by the time I get up in the morning at about 6. So see you tomorrow. It's about 7:30 in the morning, and I turned off the dehydrator about an hour or so ago. So let's have a look here. Yep, that looks pretty dry. I think we are good to go. You can see
This beef was pretty well packed in here. It's probably shrunk down by a factor of 2 or so. So there's a fair amount of water in beef, but it looks pretty well set. I normally turn the dehydrator off for a while and then let the moisture level kind of equilibrate with local humidity level. It's about 25% relative humidity this morning here in Tucson, Arizona. So it's pretty dry. It's not like these things are going to plump up or anything, but they are ready to go into the bag. All right, we're back in the kitchen here with our freshly made beef jerky, and I think it would be appropriate at this time to actually do a little taste test here. I'm always amazed at how delicious this recipe turns out. Spot on. I find the easiest way to get the stuff off the dryer racks here is just to use a big bowl. And that way you can just dump it in there. Maybe use a spatula if things are sticking a little bit. But this way, when you get all done, you can just empty the bowl into the Ziploc bag, and it just makes it a little quicker. One of the things that making beef jerky in the dehydrator always involves, there's always a little bit of cleanup. I find these trays, they get a little bit of the marinade on them, and the easiest way to clean them up is I just throw them in the sink with some warm water and just let them soak for a couple hours, and the marinade will soak right off. And you can see I got a little bit on the surface of the dehydrator itself, but that's easy to clean up. Just a wet washcloth and that'll come right off. Okay, so there's our 4 pounds of beef jerky turned into this, and now we can just toss this into a 1 gallon Ziploc bag. I find it works a little better if you turn the top inside out like that. And then you can just stuff it in there. You can do this a little bit more carefully if you want to keep the pieces intact. I do it kind of a rough stuff like this. Not particularly careful, but when we get all done, I'll just keep it in this 1 gallon freezer bag in our chest freezer, and then when I prepare my food for a trip, I'll just go in and take a handful of this out and put it into a 1 quart bag, and then I'm ready for the trail. So there we go. 4 pounds of beef reduced to jerky, and we can just toss this in the freezer. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. I encourage you to try dehydrating. This is a great recipe to start with. As I said, it doesn't involve any cooking at all. You just marinate and throw the stuff into the dehydrator. So this is a great recipe to start with. Thanks again, and if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please click like down below or subscribe to my channel. That's always a good thing. Or even better is to leave me a comment. I love getting comments on YouTube, and I try to respond to all of them as quickly as I possibly can. So take care.